Hi, this is Peter Konechny with Medievalist.net, and we are here at the 2011 Haskins Conference at Boston College, and we're joined by George Theotokos who's doing his postdoc at the University of Notre Dame, and you just gave a kind of paper here that talked about a couple of well-known battles from the 11th century. Could you just tell us a little about that?
Well, the two major battles of the 11th century, the, the Battle of Hastings in 1066 and the Battle of Dyrrhachium in 1081, they're the two most famous and the most characteristic examples of Norman warfare, the one in the north and the one in the south. So what I did in the papers, I actually compared one battle from two very different operational theaters of war that the Normans take part in the 11th century.
Can you just kind of outline, like, what happens in these two battles here?
Well, what I compared is the battle tactics employed by the Normans against two different enemies. Essentially, what I argued is that they employ these two different battles, the same battle tactics against two very different enemies, against the Saxons on the one hand and against the Byzantines on the other hand. So my major question was, do they adapt? Do they adapt their battle tactics to face two different enemies? And the question is not.
And it's like, well, and they're in one case they're fighting in England, in the other case this is a fight against the second battle is against the Byzantines. So this is like a different group of Normans, and but
well, exactly. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's not. They're not different, but
well, they're not really the conquerors.
Well, they come from the same institutional background. They come from the same military background, and although some recent research has proved that only 25% of the Normans that immigrated south, were actually Normans from Normandy. I mean, most of the rest of the 75% were French from neighboring regions of Normandy. But all of them, and that's the most intriguing part of my research in general, and I've tried to present some of my findings in this paper, is that although they come from the same background, they're all coming from Normandy. They come from the same institutional background, the same military background. They have the same experience in warfare. Because what I argued is that they use the same tactics as the Franks did since the 9th century. They're more or less the same, and they use the same tactics against two different enemies. So why do they do that? That was a major question.
Like one of the major tactics is this cavalry charge, and it's this one thing I guess all school kids learn about is the Normans are able to use their horses to make these charges, but you don't find that they were very successful, like in parts. So.
Well, I mean, cavalry charge was their main weapon, was their most famous weapon, and at least, I mean, they were elevated to sort of a myth by their contemporary chronicles, the 12th century chronicles, like, for example, Orderic Vitalis, who the whole thing about the cavalry charge was a myth, both for the Normans in the north and the Normans in the south. But again, both the Saxons and the Byzantines and the Muslims were actually very familiar with these tactics. I mean, they weren't something unique. They were good at what they were doing. They were good at charging, massing their soldiers in the center of the formation and charging against the main division of the enemy, trying to break the enemy formation, actually disperse the enemy soldiers. But especially the Byzantines, who judged by the military manuals of the 10th century, were very familiar with these tactics. Now, why the Byzantines and the Saxons actually chose to engage them, that's a different question, but they weren't employing any new battle tactics. Perhaps with the exception of the Muslims, but both the Byzantines and the Saxons were very familiar with Norman cavalry charge.
Now, even despite like the kind of familiarity, the Normans do win these battles, and they do have quite a good success, not only in England but in Italy and Sicily, and you could say at other areas as well. So, what do you think is like the secret of the Norman success?
Well, if we were in a pub and we're actually discussing this in a pub, I would say that the Normans don't win; it's their enemies that lose their battles. I mean, it was if Alexius could, or if Harold could, they could have won the battles. It was the tactical mistakes that their enemies do that cost them the battle.
Mm-hmm.
So what I argued again, I raised two questions in my paper. What if? I mean, every historian raises these questions in his career hundreds of times. What if the Saxons hadn't broken their formation? What if the Varangian Guard hadn't charged against the enemy? What if? What if? What if? What I believe from, because I've studied the normal cavalry tactics, the normal battle tactics in the 11th century, and I ventured to I'm starting to venture the 12th century as well. But I wouldn't say that the Normans were lacking, not at all. But it was the tactical mistakes made by their enemies in each operational theatre. One battle against them, the Anglo-Saxons in 1066. Then we have two cases against Byzantium. We have three battles against the Muslims in Sicily. It was the Normans taking advantage of the tactical mistakes made by the enemies, but made by their enemies, and were very clever in taking advantage of these tactical mistakes. I mean, don't forget that Robert Guiscard means Robert the Cunning.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So he was very, very clever in taking advantage of the mistakes.
It's a fascinating, effort, and I think a lot of people are interested in Normans and military history. And your overall research, this is just part of what you're doing also.
Well, I don't consider myself an expert, but I've dealt with Norman warfare and Byzantine warfare in the Mediterranean theater of war. So I've studied the Normans in southern Italy and Sicily, in the Balkans. For example, I've studied their employment by the Byzantine emperors, and I'm about to publish an article about it. And of course, the Middle East and the First Crusade with Bohemond. But it was my first attempt to, again, venture into the Anglo-Norman warfare, the early stages of the Anglo-Norman warfare. And if you study these battles, if you study the Battle of Dragon, there's an inevitable comparison with what's going on in England. So I'm hoping that in the future I'm going to be able to deal more with William II as a commander after 1066 and his successors. But I'm hoping that it will happen in the future.
Yeah, well, good. We wish you great luck in your research, and thank you for talking with us today.
You're welcome.